Villains are destined to die. Chapter 81. Hearing the conclusion to his story, I was stunned into silence. What kind of things had he already been through that made him capable of cutting off a bear's head at such a young age? It was as though the peaceful flow of our conversation had been rudely disrupted by a powerful storm. The Crown Prince read my silence for what it was and laughed mockingly. Still, my lady's courage is certainly something, isn't it? I only took advantage of the situation presented to me, but you actually fought a bear, he said, back to usual self. I watched the nasty smile spread across his face, and suddenly wondered if it wasn't that me he was marking, but himself from his childhood. You're much better with the crossbow than I thought you would be, Callisto continued. Not even experienced hunters react as calmly as you did when faced with a bear. If you tried to run, the bear would have easily caught you and torn your limbs off. You should put aside useless anxieties and take pride in your instincts and reflexes. It was unexpected that he would seek to comfort me. I stared at him with wide eyes and found myself becoming calm as I listened to the gruff, careless delivery of his words. Perhaps it was because we'd experienced something so similar. I found it ironic that it was the Crown Prince, of all people, who was trying to reassure me. Thank you for the compliment, I said awkwardly after a long moment. It seems to me that you were quite brave yourself, even at such a young age. I didn't have much else to say in response to the story he told. Though I pitied him for his rough childhood, that feeling was fleeting. I changed my mind as soon as I heard him recount how he'd cut the bear's head off and used it to win the tournament. This asshole had the makings of a scumbag, even at that age. However, even though I'd praised him, the Crown Prince's face twisted into a scowl as if he were displeased. That's it, what? What do you mean? I asked, puzzled. His frown deepened. That's all you have to say about my story? Yes, that's it. Do you have no capacity for emotion? I'm sorry, I asked, taken aback by the sudden personal attack. His ruby eyes glared at me. How could you be so cold-hearted? I don't understand, I said, my eyes wide in astonishment. What? That's rich coming from you. I gaped at a loss for words as he added crossly. When I tell this story to the soldiers shivering around the campfire, they're always reduced to tears. Does my lady feel no pity for my younger self? I laughed incredulously. No, I don't pity you. Not even a little. What was there to pity about him anyway? I was the most pitiful character in this damned game. At least he didn't have to grovel before people he hated, while worried that their affection scores might drop. His red-eyed gaze told me he was waiting for some kind of answer, so I chose to reply as vaguely as possible. Well, in any case, you're alive and well now. The truly tragic stories are the ones that end with death. He certainly had no idea how hard I was working to avoid exactly that sad ending. Harv, he muttered, clicking his tongue. I guess the rumors were right about you being a cold-hearted villain. Well, look who's talking. I didn't have it in me to take condemnation from him, even if I'd put up with endless insults from the other male protagonists. I was about to explode with rage when I noticed that his red eyes were gleaming at me tauntingly. I took a deep breath and reminded myself to have patience. Son of a bitch. Closing my mouth tightly, I glared daggers at him, cursing him to hell and back in my mind. The severe expression on his face suddenly relaxed, and a laugh escaped his mouth. You know, not a single moment spent with you is dull, he said. Just before affection score 34%, his affection had risen, the surge accompanied by a faint smile on his lips. My eyes widened slowly. 5%. That was quite a generous increase. I gazed blankly at the number hovering above his golden hair. I'd reached the base 30% affection score that was awarded in normal mode, and it was now safe to say that the Crown Prince was unlikely to be the cause of my death any time soon. It felt unreal. Perhaps it was because I was relieved, but a strange feeling washed over me as I gazed at his smiling face. The trembling is gone now, I see, he suddenly remarked, releasing his vice-like grip on my waist. He lowered me carefully, opposite to the abrupt way he'd scooped me up earlier. He rose to his feet and retreated to the other side of the fire, saying, Now you should get some proper sleep. The warmth that had surrounded me quickly faded away, but, as he'd said, my shaking had completely stopped. Father, Derek said, entering the tent. There you are. Duke Eckhart, who'd been tapping his finger against the desk nervously, brightened upon seeing his eldest son. Derek was shaking his head, however, making the Duke's hopeful expression fall into a frown. So no news yet, the Duke asked. Reynolds taken the hunting dogs into the forest again. We'll hear from him soon. Who was the last person to see her? We found a knight who claims that she asked the way to the hunting area for the smaller animals. And she went in that direction, Derek nodded quietly. The sound of the Duke's fist slamming down on the desk in frustration was loud in the ensuing silence. The sun's all but set. What the hell is a girl who's not even come of age, yet going to do alone in the forest at night? Though Penelope had mentioned that she wanted to go see the hunting grounds, the Duke had not expected her to actually go through with it. Penelope was a fickle girl, and even if she had done so, the area designated for hunting smaller animals was not too far from the clearing where the tent that served as headquarters for the hunting tournament was set up. The guards stationed there should have been able to locate her quickly in the event of an emergency. However, if she had wandered into the part of the forest where the dangerous predators had been set loose, they would have a problem on their hands. The Duke massaged his aching temples, and the Crown Prince. Derek's eye twitched ever so slightly, but the Duke was too busy rubbing his head to notice the hard set to his son's mouth. The palace has also sent out a search party. As it happened, Penelope wasn't the only person who was missing, though the horn had sounded quite some time ago to signal the end of the hunt. The Crown Prince hadn't returned either. I've requested that they inform us if he is found, so all we can do now is wait. Don't tell me that bastard has dragged Penelope off again, threatening to kill her. Father, Derek said, cutting the Duke off. The walls have ears. He had also considered the possibility, of course. However, they were surrounded by nobles of all sorts of affiliations, and there was no knowing if spies were listening to them. Reynold was the first to search for her, and says he saw something strange. Derek continued quietly. There was a dead brown bear in the gold-marked region, where the worst of predators were set loose. It had no head. A dead bear. The Duke's voice was also low as he processed this serious news. Yes. Interestingly enough, the severed head was found some distance from the body. The fur on the body was also burnt in several places in roughly the size and shape of a small round pellet ammunition. What? The marks had to be made by Penelope's enchanted ammo. The Duke's mouth fell open as he realized what Derek was saying. Could he have attacked the bear? I was assured that without question no evidence of that was found, Derek said firmly. The Duke relaxed, relieved. And what did they do with the bear's carcass? Marquis Ellen's servants arrived first and were tending to the carcass, so we were forced to leave it to them after being allowed to examine it briefly. The House of Ellen? The Duke asked, his thick eyebrows climbing upwards upon unexpectedly hearing that name. Then does that mean Marquis Ellen killed the bear? That is impossible. It was probably one of the bears that the Crown Prince has distastefully modified to be of particularly violent temperament. I suppose it's absurd to think an old man who can't even shoot a bow properly would be capable of killing a bear, the Duke mused, and if he had, he'd have brought back the head. Marquis Ellen had returned with only 2 deer and no bear's head. I can't figure out what's going on, the Duke muttered, heaving a deep sigh. Penelope, that irresponsible child, why did she have to wander into that dangerous area? I shouldn't have given that crossbow back to her. Father, Derek asked when the Duke's muttered rant had trailed off. What kind of spell did you have that crossbow imbued with? What magic could have made that girl rash enough to shoot a bear? The Duke cleared his throat and turned away, clearly uncomfortable with this new topic of conversation. Derek's eyes narrowed. Wait, don't tell me you disguised a lethal weapon as harmless using magic. Lethal? Don't be absurd. It's nothing like that, the Duke said, his head whipping around at the accusation. He added gruffly, it just makes anyone hit by it pass out momentarily. No doubt it passed inspections because it's suitable for hunting. Is that really all there is to it? He's too perceptive for his own good. The Duke groaned, faced with his first son's tenacity. I also had a spell added that will erase the most recent memories of anyone hit. Derek's emotionless face suddenly contorted into a scowl, and a weighted silence filled the tent. Then Derek said, why did you give her a weapon like that? The Duke glanced at his son and said calmly, I told her that if there was someone she really needed to shoot, she should make sure there were no witnesses. The magic would ensure that whomever she shot wouldn't remember upon waking. You gave her a dangerous weapon, knowing her temperament, Derek said, his voice deep with carefully repressed anger. What if she throws another fit like last year and starts shooting people? If people suddenly started showing up with no memories after being shot, how were you planning on dealing with the fallout? Tusk, don't get carried away, the Duke protested weakly. It was a last resort measure. She said she had reflected on her foolish behavior, so I'm sure she was careful. Is it not enough that Count Kellen took ownership of one of our mines? Do you plan to dole out the rest of our fortune to any noble she attacks? Derek Eckhart, the Duke warned, voice sharp. Count Kellen had made a huge fuss over Penelope's attack on his daughter, and the Duke had been forced to hand over an entire diamond mine to placate him. It had been an immense loss for the Eckhart house. However, as Penelope was a noble lady officially registered on their family tree, he could not let her go to prison over such a childish mistake. Finally, the Duke said, "That's enough. I had my reasons for giving her that weapon. She's endured a lot lately, given recent events in our household." Chapter 82. Father, Derek raised his voice, something he rarely did. He ground his teeth together, the muscles in his jaw clenched. What a ridiculous reason to give her a magically modified crossbow. She was quite upset regarding the matter with Lady Dona and the incident at the training grounds. Derek looked ready to continue shouting, but the Duke cut him off. Her slave choked that night because he insulted Penelope while everyone stood watching. Did you know that? Derek fell abruptly silent. He'd learned about the details of the confrontation after the fact. That was why he'd gone to the training grounds upon hearing from the butler that Penelope was there practicing with her crossbow, to give her the news that the irreverent bastard who'd insulted her had been dismissed. He'd been overcome with rage upon finding her holding her crossbow, essentially wrapped in the arms of her slave. Thus he'd been unable to say any of what he'd intended to. After suffering such humiliation, she told me, she'd rather stay confined in her room than take part in the hunting tournament. The Duke continued. What was I to do? Scold her? So I gave her the crossbow to try and make her feel better. She can't stay cooped up in the mansion for the rest of her life, can she? Derek was silent for a moment. I fired Mark and the other knights involved in that incident immediately, he informed, voice extremely cold. If she told you or me, or even the butler, the matter could have been handled easily. But she always makes things harder than they have to be. That Penelope. Derek, the Duke called, not allowing him to finish speaking. Don't be so quick to hate her. In a way, it's my fault that she has grown to be such an unruly girl. I was the one who insisted on bringing her home with me, but I didn't take proper care of her. She seems to have seen the error of her ways. So take good care of her from now on. She is your only sister, after all. Derek clenched his fist angrily. The only sister I have is Ivan, he said through a tense jaw and gritted teeth. The Duke stared at him for a long moment, then looked away with a sigh. It's time we moved on. Father, Derek's head whipped around to glare incredulously at the older man. How could he say such a thing? He was Ivan's biological father. We lost Ivan in an accident that couldn't be avoided, said the Duke, continuing. We've not once given up on looking for her since then, but we haven't heard anything or found any leads. It's time we came to terms with the fact that she is no longer of this world. Father, it's already been 6 years since Penelope came to the mansion. There was pain in the Duke's eyes as he watched his son's contorted expression. It's true that I didn't ask either of you for your opinion or think things through before adopting her. I also chose not to comment on what was happening in the mansion. But how much longer do you intend to bully and hate Penelope to relieve your guilty conscience regarding Ivan? Derek's blue eyes were wide like saucers. The idea of bullying or hating his adopted sister had never even occurred to him, and if he were to retaliate against her in some way, he would have chosen to just ignore her. If anyone had behaved in that manner, it was Reynolds. There was no way Derek was childish enough to pick on a girl for taking his sister's place. Derek replied, his tone subdued. I've never hated Penelope or bullied her, father. The only reason he'd grown to dislike her was because of her wicked behavior and terrible manners, which meant that he had little reason to dislike her now, that she seemed to be acting like a civilized human being. That was why he hadn't been as hard on her as before. Suddenly, a memory of Penelope's dry voice came unbidden. No, Lord Derek. Did Emily ask you to carry this for her? Whatever punishment you give me, I'll accept it without a word of complaint, Lord Derek. The girl who'd always called him brother or Derek had begun to call him Lord Derek at some point. Though she behaved the same as before in front of others, she made this distinction very clear when they were alone. He'd shuddered with revulsion whenever the girl had affectionately referred to him as brother. I shall stay out of your sight from now on, so you needn't worry about me. But now she grew cold and stiff whenever she saw him and kept her distance. The realization shocked him. In fact, I believe I'm the one hated by. He was reluctantly about to admit it when someone threw the tent flap aside violently. Father, Reynolds rushed inside. Reynolds, the Duke acknowledged. Someone is claiming they saw Penelope. Reynolds relayed quickly, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. What? Who saw her? Baron Chalit, Reynolds answered promptly. Baron Chalit. He's Count Kellen's daughter, Lady Gloria's fiancé. Derek filled in quickly as the Duke trailed off, unable to remember. The Baron was such an insignificant player that the Duke hadn't recognized his name immediately. He was a distant relative of Marquis Ellen, and had managed to worm a title out of the Empress consort through dedicated brown nosing. However, early in the year, a sudden engagement between the house of the Baron and the house of the Count had been announced, to the surprise of many in high society. Rumours swirled that the Ellen and Kellen houses, possessing only female heirs, had made use of a distant relative in order to force an alliance. Since both houses were united in supporting the second prince, it was a plausible hypothesis. So, where did this Baron Chalit see Penelope? The Duke demanded urgently. Reynold wore an odd expression, and after a brief moment of hesitation said, "He has been raving ever since Penelope shot him in the forest." "What?" "He's been drooling like a fool since he was found, searching for a hunting goddess with dark pink hair." The Duke gaped, unable to say anything. But that wasn't all. Not only that, but he's not the only noble to wake up in the forest acting like a madman. There are many. The very situation Derek had feared was coming to pass. A breeze rushed through the cave, causing me to feel a sudden chill and jolt awake. It seemed to be early morning, judging by the faint blue light filling the cave. The campfire that had been burning all night had gone out, and smoke was softly spiraling from the remaining coals. Beyond it, I could see Callisto sleeping with his back to the wall. I should get dressed before he wakes up. I was still naked under the cloak, meaning I could feel the soft, cold breeze acutely against my bare skin. Doing my best not to make a sound, I got to my feet. To my relief, my clothes, which had been set out next to the fire, were completely dry. I was quickly pulling them on, attempting to finish before the prince woke, when there was another cold gust accompanied by the ghostly wail of the wind. A breeze rushed through the cave, causing my hair to flutter ominously. Pausing in buttoning my jacket, I hesitated, realizing what had been bothering me. The breeze, it was sweeping outwards from inside the cave. I squinted into the darkness with bated breath until it came again. The great gust of wind caused me to stumble back. I wasn't mistaken. The cold draft was definitely coming from inside the cave. Is there another entrance at the other end? I wondered. If a wind blowing from the other side could be felt from my position, that meant the cave itself was short and likely a straight tunnel. All I could see, however, was complete darkness, which seemed to suggest that the cave couldn't be that shallow. A breeze rushed through the cave, causing the ghastly voice of the wind to cry once more. I rushed to the Crown Prince. "Your Highness, wake up." He seemed to be deeply asleep, however, and didn't stir. I didn't want to touch his bare skin, but with no other choice, I shook him by the shoulder. "Your Highness." Callisto's eyes didn't open. I realized that his skin felt extremely cold under my fingers. Is it because he gave his cloak to me and slept without a blanket? And perhaps in consideration of me, the Crown Prince was still wearing his damp pants. "Your Highness, Your Highness." I shook him several times, but he wouldn't wake. I suddenly grew scared, remembering that he'd also been injured by both dagger and sword yesterday. "Don't tell me he's dead." I pressed my ear to his chest. His heartbeat was steady, meaning he was still alive. Removing my head from his chest, I slapped his cheek lightly in an attempt to wake him. Well, there's nothing for it, since shaking him doesn't seem to be doing anything. I slapped him hard. "Your Highness, open your eyes." I slapped him again, smacking him over and over, my soft slaps growing more forceful with time. Of course, I wasn't motivated by anything other than the desire to wake him. There was nothing else to be done about it. Since my soft slaps didn't seem to be working, Your Highness, Your Highness, attempting one final time to check if he was awake yet, I slapped him so hard the sound rang throughout the cavern. The Crown Prince groaned, his face scrunching into a scowl. His eyelids twitched, and then he blinked open red eyes. "Are you all right? Do you feel ill?" I asked worriedly, quickly hiding my hand behind my back. I'd been preparing to slap him again. "Lady, yes, Your Highness. Did you just slap me in the face?" "What? Don't be absurd. I would never dare do such a thing." I shook my head, eyes wide. My eyes were glued to his cheek, which was cherry red. Zod. I was fairly certain someone smacked me, was smacking my face. "You must have been dreaming. Please get up." I shot to my feet before he could put together what I'd been doing, and kindly brought him his clothing and armor. Perhaps I was feeling a touch bad for my actions. This is no time to discuss dreams. A wind is blowing from inside the cave. A wind? Yes, I don't think this cave is shallow, and yet another great gust of frosty wind blew past at that very moment. The Crown Prince, who'd been pulling on the clothes I'd given him, paused and stared into the cave. "Wait," he said, his expression rigid. "What is it? I feel someone's mana." His serious eyes met mine. "There seems to be someone else inside this cavern." Chapter 83. "Someone's in here," I said, blinking with surprise. Rather than being shocked that we weren't alone in the cave, I was more surprised that the Crown Prince somehow knew someone was there. That's pretty scary, unlike Callisto, whose eyes were flashing with alarm. I wasn't really worried. If this was a dangerous episode planned by the game, a damned system window would have appeared by now, and I didn't care if this was one of the surprise events that had nothing to do with the story either, since the invincible Crown Prince would no doubt mince any attackers into tiny pieces. I have to check it out. The Crown Prince, having draped his cloak over his shoulders once more, picked up his sword and rose to his feet. However, he grunted and swayed on his feet as soon as he had risen. "Ugh, Your Highness," I said, this time truly surprised as I caught his arm, trying to support some of his weight. He didn't look well at all. "Your Highness, what's the matter? Please sit down again." "I'm fine. I was just dizzy for a moment. Maybe your wounds are infected." "You look so pale," I said, voice audibly worried. The Crown Prince suddenly grinned. "Why do you ask? I got the impression you'd be quite happy to see me die based on how enthusiastically you were slapping me. You know about that. If we'd been near the palace, you'd have been dragged away for attacking a member of the imperial family." "What? That's absurd," I protested emphatically. "I had to wake Your Highness, so I had no other choice." I fell silent as my embarrassing attempt at an excuse was cut short by the icy wind, which wailed once more from somewhere deep inside the cave. Callisto appraised the darkness with sharp eyes and darted forward. As soon as the breeze had swept past, he approached what remained of the fire and struck the flint a few times, causing a new fire to flare quickly to life. Then he took the longest and thickest piece of firewood he'd brought the night before and lit it. His impromptu torch flared to life. "What are you doing? Stay here. I'll be right back." "Your Highness." I hurriedly clung onto his cloak before he could disappear into the dark cave. "Is it really necessary to look into it now?" He arched a brow. "What do you mean by that? It might be dangerous. Shouldn't we get out of the forest first and bring back reinforcements?" Suddenly, a glaringly bright rectangular window slid into view in the darkness behind the Crown Prince. "System, hidden quest. Explore the suspicious cave. Rewards unspecified. Accept/decline." I stared blankly at the notification. I realized I might have jinxed myself with my earlier thoughts, that I wouldn't need to worry until a system window appeared. The timing of it gave me goosebumps. What if whoever it is disappears before we can return? The Crown Prince said, glancing back at me, no doubt finding it strange that I'd suddenly stopped talking. "No one inside the palace is allowed to use magic, except the mages under oath. Anyone who disobeys is executed on the spot. I can't sense much mana, which suggests there's only one person. I'll kill them quickly and return." His sword slid out of its scabbard with a metallic sound as he readied himself to rush into the gloom. I didn't have time to consider things properly. "I'll go with you then." Feeling like I might burst into tears, I pressed the accept button. I desperately wished I could press decline instead, but I had no choice. If I let him go alone and something bad happened, who knew if it would cause his affection score to drop? And the rewards from every hidden quest I'd done so far had ended up being very useful. "Aren't you out of ammunition, my lady?" The Crown Prince commented sardonically when he saw me retrieve the crossbow from the ground. He seemed to be suggesting I was useless without the weapon. "Two is better than one, isn't it? I think you'll only be dead weight. Don't worry, I've got no way of shooting anyone now, so I'll just run away by myself if we encounter another assassin." "Huh, your impudence never fails to surprise me. Doesn't the Eckhart family teach their children the proper etiquette for addressing a member of the imperial family?" The Crown Prince said, tudding like I was an unruly child. "You started it," I thought irritably. As I straightened from picking up the crossbow, something shiny caught my eye. Two unfamiliar weapons were lying next to where the crossbow had been, a bloody dagger and a short sword. Wait, I realized that they were the weapons that had been used to injure the Crown Prince yesterday. Oddly enough, however, it wasn't the sharp blade of the dagger that shone in the dim light, but the rough-looking hilt of the short sword. But why? I moved closer, and it glimmered more fiercely in the firelight, as if encouraging me to pick it up. I grabbed it, puzzled, and at the same moment a system window appeared. "System, you have acquired an engraved short sword as a reward." This took me by surprise. Does that mean this is the assassin's token? I was staring dubiously at it when the Crown Prince called irritably, "How long are you going to just squat down there like that? If you don't want to come, then just say so." I'm coming. You need to learn a little patience." I took the dagger with me as well and hurried back to him. "Why are you bringing those with you?" "I'll use them to defend myself since I can't use my crossbow." "Do you know how to wield a sword too?" the Crown Prince asked, surprised. I didn't, of course, but I didn't tell him that. "Let's go," I said instead. and so I went with the Crown Prince to explore the suspicious cave. The cave grew narrower and more winding as we progressed. The air was damp from the water sporadically dripping from above, and the breeze blowing toward us was only growing stronger. The icy wind wailed once more, and Callisto's torch flickered violently when the breeze blew past again. There must really be something inside. I forced myself to continue walking forward, though the creepy sound the wind was making made my hair stand on end. Every time I started to regret accepting the quest, I turned anxious eyes on the back of the prince's head. Please let everything be all right. Honestly, I was more frightened of his affection score dropping than the creepy wind. We'd been walking for a good while, following the curving tunnel, when the Crown Prince came to an abrupt stop. "Look," he said. I squinted where he was pointing, and saw a far-away and faint point of light. "That has to be the source. I can feel the mana get stronger." Another breeze swept past, this time much stronger than before. The flickering torch finally went out, and we were suddenly plunged into darkness. When the wind passed, the light we'd seen in the distance went out as well. I couldn't figure out why. "Let's go quickly," I said, wanting to get this quest over and done with as quickly as possible. I wished I could run ahead, but the cave was now so narrow that we had to walk single file, and I was unable to get past him. "I don't understand," Callisto said, his voice puzzled as he continued to walk. "Are you really a noble lady?" "What do you mean?" Most ladies would scream and rush into a man's arms in a situation like this. Realizing what he was hinting at, I scoffed. "In your dreams." "Sadly, Your Highness, the tunnel is much too narrow for that. The next time we find ourselves on a wider road, I'll be sure to throw myself into your arms." "I look forward to it," he said with a mocking laugh. "Yeah, you do that." Once we were free from this forest, I would ensure that I was never alone with him ever again. I followed briskly behind him, and soon enough we arrived at the source of the light. It was a crack in the stone, much narrower than the tunnel itself. "The edges are sharp, so be careful not to cut yourself," the Crown Prince said. He pushed himself through the crack with some effort. Since I was smaller than him, I had much less trouble passing through. When I got to the other side, I found myself looking down at him from where I was standing. "Am I supposed to jump down?" I wondered, taken aback. He held out his hand. "Hold on." I stared at him in surprise for a moment before reaching for his hand. He supported my weight, easily helping me to the floor. The strongest gust of air yet buffeted us around as a bright blue light suddenly erupted in front of us. Ugh, I squeezed my eyes shut automatically, and my ponytail was tossed around by the wind, feeling like it might come loose from its tie at any second. The gust died down quickly, however, and I opened my eyes, which were starting to water. The blue light was gone. The Crown Prince darted forward without saying a word, and I followed, taking in my surroundings. We found ourselves in a pretty large space, a stark contrast to the narrow tunnel from earlier. It appeared to be a man-made room, and there was a round, flat podium in the center. It looked like it had been carved from a single slab of large stone, and stood taller than most grown men. Because of its height, I couldn't see past it. The Crown Prince used the jagged rocks around it as footholds to climb on top of it with ease. I followed suit, and when I finally reached the top, my eyes felt like they might fall out of my head at what I found. Wait, in the center of the flat surface was an upright skeleton with no lower body. Its arms were raised in the air as if it were cheering, and there was a large, mysterious scroll clutched in each hand. The blue light suddenly flickered to life around the skeleton, and another gust blasted outwards. Chapter 84. The blue flash of light blinded us, and a massively strong gust of wind blasted past us. Ugh, since I'd only just climbed over the edge after Callisto, the sudden wind caused me to lose balance. My body tensed in anticipation of falling, but a strong hand gripped my wrist firmly. "Careful." The Crown Prince didn't seem at all fazed by the wind, holding onto me effortlessly as he stood steady in place. As the wind whooshed outwards again, I held down my hair with one hand and pried my eyes open with considerable effort. Wait, there was a large circle surrounding the skeleton on the altar. A complicated pattern began to form inside, as if an invisible person was drawing on the floor, and before long the blue light erupted again above the circle. There was a formless energy that whirled around the skeleton, like an invisible, rippling flame. It also seemed to be the source of the powerful gusts of wind. The tattered clothing that the skeleton wore fluttered around wildly. "It's a magic circle," the Crown Prince said after gazing at it for several long moments. "A magic circle." I stared blankly at the blue light coming from the design, unsure of what he meant. The wind died down again, and the rippling energy seemed to follow suit. The pattern on the floor slowly faded, and the cave was silent once more. So someone was using magic inside the palace grounds without permission. though they obviously died a long time ago. The Crown Prince, who'd been holding my wrist tightly to keep me from falling off, now let go. Sure enough, the skeleton standing in the magic circle looked very old. The cave was a damp environment though, which meant remains as old as these appeared to be would usually have rotted away by now. Has it been preserved by magic? I was curious how the skeleton was able to stay upright, even though the blasts of wind were strong enough to knock a living person off their feet. Why is there only an upper body? I asked. Mummies were sometimes discovered in a standing position, but that was only possible when the skin and muscle on the lower body had been preserved. The remains that were in front of me couldn't be described as a mummy. There wasn't a single hint of flesh on the ribs and the severed backbone, and it looked like it was almost fused with the rock at its base. Peering at it with great interest, I wondered aloud, did the water trickling down cause the bones to fuse with the stone? The skeleton has remained intact because of residual mana. It seems this person used their own body as a sacrifice to the magic circle in order to bind their soul here, the Crown Prince said. I realized that I'd been musing out loud without realizing it. I guess you've seen skeletons like this before since you don't seem all that surprised by it. He watched me peering at the remains curiously with some amusement. Sometimes animals are used for this kind of ritual instead, but this body was pulverized while they were still alive, and they died halfway through the process. Their body was pulverized, I repeated, shocked. Callisto nodded and said grimly, a powerful life force must be supplied to the magic circle in order to activate it. Powerful life force? I knew nothing about magic circles or life forces. What the... There wasn't any information about this sort of thing in normal mode, and his explanation wasn't at all what I'd been expecting, leaving me confused. What is this, a fantasy movie? How do you bind your soul to something? After a moment's puzzlement, I abruptly remembered that this wasn't reality, just a game world where magic was commonplace, so I needn't try to find logic in it. Why did that person try to bind their soul here? They probably wanted this magic circle to operate even after their death. I wonder what kind of spell they cast. Quite a nasty individual, I'd say. Callisto scowled and added, for the sake of those residing at the palace, it's probably a good thing this bastard died before he could succeed. I nodded. It was pretty terrifying that this random person had tried to secretly carry out some kind of magic, right deep inside a forest on the palace grounds. The Crown Prince walked around the outer rim of the magic circle, eyeing the skeleton. It looks like the soul has been consumed, and only the mana inside the body remains trapped inside the magic circle. If that is enough to keep the magic circle active all this time, they must have been a pretty formidable mage when they were alive. I understood this to mean that the remaining mana inside the dead body had preserved the skeleton. So mana is all you need to preserve a corpse, not some complex mixture of chemicals. Magic made the world such a convenient place. Suddenly, I felt a faint vibration. There was a deep buzzing sound, and the blue magic circle began to reappear on the rock floor once more. It was about to activate again. It could be dangerous, so back away from it for a second, Callisto said, gesturing for me to step back. I did as I was told, climbing down from the rock altar carefully. The skeleton's mana surged from within the magic circle, once more in a great blast of wind. Callisto pulled out his sword and plunged it violently into the invisible wall with a sickening crunch. Immediately, a loud booming sound, like that of an explosion, filled the entire cave as the cluster of mana resisted the sword that the prince was using to cut through it. His luxurious golden hair danced wildly in the wind, but the Crown Prince didn't seem fazed. He just held the sword firmly in place, piercing the rock altar, red eyes staring into space as if bored. Blue sparks began to fly around him. Loud cracking, crunching sounds rang out. As the rock developed fissures beginning in the spot he'd plunged his sword into it. The thin cracks widened and spread rapidly, filling the entire magic circle. With a great crunching noise, the violent gusts of wind died away, the billowing mana and the violently surging magic circle suddenly disappearing with a flash. Phew, the Crown Prince yanked his sword out with a deep sigh. There were droplets of sweat beading on his forehead, so I assumed disrupting the spell must have been quite strenuous for him. Is it over, Your Highness? I asked, taking my hands from my ears since the deafening noises had faded. I've destroyed it completely, Callisto said with a careless nod. Now let's find out what kind of spell they meant to cast. Sword in hand, he strode across the cracked surface toward the skeleton, his target the arms which each held a thick scroll. He paused in front of it and rubbed his chin, thinking, before raising his sword. He looked prepared to strike the skeleton. Realizing what he was doing, I shouted, Your Highness. Callisto paused, turning to me. I rushed to him. What are you doing? I'm going to cut off its arms. Why? I need to read the scrolls in order to learn what this person was trying to achieve by creating a magic circle on the palace grounds. You don't have to damage the skeleton to do that. The Crown Prince's eyebrows twitched, clearly not understanding what I was trying to say. Are you going to handle the skeleton and retrieve the scrolls for me? Yes. What? I'll get them for you, I said with a quick nod, excited. I'd always wanted to excavate a human skeleton, and I didn't want the remains to be destroyed by the Crown Prince's sword. Happy solution. It had been preserved for a long time in such an interesting position, after all. Back away for one moment, Your Highness, and put away that sword, I said, softly pushing the dangerous man backward. Ha, he laughed incredulously but complied, sheathing his sword in one elegant motion. His mocking expression seemed to say, show me what you can do then. After confirming that he'd moved out of the way, I stood in front of the skeleton and clasped my hands together as I bowed my head. Sorry about this. I need to disturb your final resting place. Archaeologists were almost the most nervous when excavating human remains or tombs. It was hard to believe for most people, but supernatural incidents were more common than one would think during such undertakings. Sometimes even rituals or prayers were done prior. I'd just finished my silent apology when the Crown Prince spoke. What are you doing? He was right next to me, peering down at me like I was some kind of interesting specimen. I'll be touching their remains, so I'm just paying my respects. Why? I wished them peace and prayed that nothing strange will happen when we take the things that belong to them. How absurd, the Crown Prince said, glaring at me with a frown. I never took you for the superstitious type. I ignored him. A general investigation into the state of things was always required before an excavation. I bent down and studied the scrolls, and the hands holding them carefully. The paper was rotten and black where it was in contact with the bones, perhaps because the person had died holding the scrolls. Around the blackened areas were deposits of dust, sand, and other debris. Do we have a brush or something? Of course, there was nothing like that inside the cave, though. Oh, I know. I was looking around for something I could use in its place when an idea came to me. I placed my crossbow on the floor and took out the dagger I'd found earlier. Then I grabbed a handful of my own hair and cut it. I was interrupted in my actions by the Crown Prince. Watch it. His hand darted out to grab my own, the one holding the dagger, and he forced me to spin around. What the hell are you doing? Chapter 85. Wide-eyed, I stared up at the Crown Prince's fierce expression. I'm cutting my hair. Why are you cutting your hair with a knife? It's dangerous. I need to use it as a brush. A brush? I was beginning to feel fed up with his constant questioning every step of the way. Just let me handle this. I asked you to wait, remember? I said in an audibly tired voice, tugging my hand from this. I'm busy trying to get this done, so don't get in my way and just wait. How rude. Are you suggesting the Crown Prince of the Empire is bothering you? I pointed at the spot I wanted him to stand and he grumbled, but did as he was told. I tucked away the dagger and took the clump of long hair that I'd cut off. The dark pink hair curled lusciously. It would have been better if my hair was straight. Disappointed, I shot a glance at the Crown Prince's blonde hair, but decided I'd have to be content with my own hair if I wanted to live. I went to the skeleton again and used the hair to gently brush the debris from the finger bones on the left hand. Removing any foreign substances from the object you wished to excavate was the first step. My hair was too soft to actually scrub everything away like an actual brush might have, but it was better than nothing. Soon enough, most of the debris I could see was gone, though the job was far from perfect. I couldn't retrieve the scroll yet though, thanks to the liquid that had oozed from the rotting corpse and the damp air of the cave. Parts of the paper were stuck to the bone. What do I do now? The paper could tear if I tried to force it. I needed to remove the moisture somehow first. Thinking deeply, I attempted to find a way to free the scrolls. Since paper artifacts were very easily damaged, they had to be handled with extreme care. The correct procedure was to move it to an aseptic chamber, apply preservatives, and allow it to dry. But I couldn't do any of that given the circumstances. I glanced around, hoping to find something I could use to remove the moisture, then spotted the extinguished torch the Crown Prince had cast aside. That's it. I allowed my handful of hair to fall scattered to the floor and went to retrieve it. Picking up the piece of wood, I smashed the tip against the rock, and the burnt parts broke apart easily. Once I had ground enough of the burnt wood into a kind of charcoal powder, I threw the torch aside, crouched, and gathered the powder with my hands. Returning to the skeleton, I began softly rubbing the powder onto the scroll. What are you doing now? The Crown Prince, who'd watched silently as I scurried about busily, once more edged closer. I'm drawing out the moisture so I can more easily remove the part stuck to the bone. He regarded me with an unreadable expression for a long moment before saying, I don't see why you're going to all this trouble. Why can't we just cut the bone? This is the best way to preserve both the skeleton and the scrolls as much as possible. It would have been nice if I had some pincers or forceps, though, I muttered to myself, not paying much attention to his ill-tempered commentary. Crouching down and applying the powder with my bare hands, I suddenly wished for some latex gloves. They had been so commonplace in my real world. You've studied archaeology? Callisto suddenly asked, making me pause in my careful application. I resumed my movements, hoping to appear casual. I just read a few books about it at home, that's all. You really are quite interesting. You seem to only take an interest in things other noble ladies wouldn't be caught dead doing. Thank you, I'll take that as a compliment, I said through gritted teeth, choosing to concentrate on finishing up with applying the powder to both scrolls. Now all I had to do was wait for the ash to absorb the moisture. My hands were a mess from the charcoal, and I stared down at them, wondering how I was going to get them clean. Here, Callisto said suddenly, holding something out for me to take. Wipe your hands. The Crown Prince was offering me his handkerchief. I stared down at it in surprise, before gathering my wits and accepting it with a muttered thanks. I didn't know you carried this sort of thing around, I said only as an afterthought, but the Crown Prince scoffed as if my words offended him. What kind of man does my lady think I am? Well, obviously, you're a lunatic. The words I wanted to say came to mind easily. A brave Crown Prince, of course, I muttered lamely, just barely managing to hold on to good sense and keep my real thoughts to myself. I just didn't think. Handkerchiefs were usually carried when one goes hunting. My brothers often forget theirs. Honestly, I didn't really know if this was the case. The Crown Prince eyed me suspiciously, but finally settled on saying, probably because they know they're likely to be receiving gifts. A noble lady gave that to me before the tournament, he said with a grin, and I stared blankly at the cloth in my hands. The white handkerchief was now grimy and dirty with soot. I belatedly realized there was a daffodil embroidered in one corner. That handkerchief is ruined now thanks to my lady. I've officially rejected her feelings for me by letting you use it and get it dirty. Wouldn't you agree? The Crown Prince clutched at his heart in mock agony. He was just trying to make fun of me again. I was sure of it, so I shoved the used handkerchief at him quickly. Just have it washed and it will be as good as new again. You simply refused to offer me one of your own handkerchiefs, he said with a scowl. It sounded like he'd only offered me the handkerchief to trick me into promising one of my own later. So I ignored that comment completely. Thank you for letting me use it. Why are you so mean to me? The Crown Prince pouted, taking the handkerchief with a disappointed expression. You're the meanest person I've ever met, you bastard. My ill temper didn't last long, however. Once I realized I could probably try my luck at removing the scrolls, I took off my jacket to use in place of gloves, since the heat of my bare hands could very easily damage the old paper. Though I wasn't particularly happy with the arrangement, I was forced to use the thinnest part of the jacket to take hold of each of the scrolls and tug them free carefully. To my great relief, I found I'd been correct in using the soot to draw away the moisture. Though it wasn't exactly an easy process, I was quickly able to pry them from the skeleton's hands. I finally breathed, since I'd hardly dared to before, afraid that the paper might crumble. A sigh escaped my lips as I placed down the jacket carefully, the two scrolls wrapped inside. Are you done? Callisto asked. Yes, why are you being so careful? We just need to read what they say, the Crown Prince said, tudding and coming closer as I gingerly opened my jacket. Not responding to his grumbling, I studied the scrolls. They were bound with a crumbling red and blue leather string respectively. Other than a black rotten patch in the center, the paper seemed to be in good condition. I saw no signs of mold or damage caused by insects. Maybe the mana preserved the paper like it did the bones, though I couldn't be sure until I was able to check inside. The paper was folded into many firm layers, which meant the rotten spots might still be legible. Now that I'd successfully removed them, I expected that they'd be kept in a safe place, since relics like these were usually first preserved, then researched. Go on, open them. The Crown Prince tugged roughly on the blue string on the second scroll. Wait, the knot came loose before I could stop him, and the scroll fell open on its own. You can't just... I was about to scold him angrily about his careless treatment of relics, when my vision filled with a flash of light. System, hidden quest complete. Explore the suspicious cave. System, you have acquired an ancient magic map as a reward. Accept, yes, /no, I stared blankly at the notification. This is a map of the northern forest, the Crown Prince said stiffly, studying the map. I turned to examine the scroll, and was surprised to see a moving map etched across its surface. When the Crown Prince touched the map in different places, the image moved and zoomed in to show more details, like the gently waving trees and brush. It felt like watching black and white footage. No way, it's almost like a tablet. The discovery of this odd magical map took me completely by surprise, but the Crown Prince seemed unmoved. The bastard was trying to create a portal into the palace grounds, it seems. A portal? I asked, confused. He reached for the red scroll and unfurled it before I could protest. It was another map, this time showing a location I couldn't identify. This is a map of the ancient city of Volta. The Crown Prince's red eyes slowly grew wider as he studied the map. A relic of Volta that is very surprising. Volta? I questioned. Yes. It is known now as Arcana City. I suppose you wouldn't know much about it, since most of the history of Volta has been erased. I didn't even know what Arcana was, but just nodded along, assuming it was a neighboring kingdom or something. I see, you know that mages often face persecution these days, correct? He asked suddenly. This was a topic I was well aware of, on account of winter. Volta was where that persecution began. Chapter 86. I stared with wide eyes upon processing the Crown Prince's remark. Where the persecution began, that's right. Back when magic wasn't as widespread as it is today, several mages came together and formed the Kingdom of Volta. He started. They somewhat ambitiously planned to conquer the world. At the conclusion of a fierce war, those who defeated Volta erased its existence and turned against all mages. I thought the whole story was just a myth, but this map seems to suggest otherwise. The Crown Prince laughed incredulously and waved both scrolls in the air. It seems this mage was trying to create a portal between Volta and the palace, since using scrolls in this manner is limited by distance. I turned my attention to the skeleton with no legs, slightly taken aback. The Crown Prince's theory was convincing. If this ancient mage hadn't died, while casting the spell, maybe the Aeoca Empire would have been conquered long ago, and replaced with a realm of mages. I pictured Winter and the children in animal masks that he protected. History had always been a fascinating subject to me, which was why I'd developed a love for archaeology. It sometimes transpired that very trivial events were the ones upon which the history of the world hung. If I knew the activation phrase, we could use this scroll to teleport out of the forest, he said, interrupting my reverie. He made an annoyed sound before continuing. Alas, this is nothing but a worthless old map as it stands. We can still use it to find our way out, I suppose. We won't be needing this though. He tossed the map of ancient Volta onto my jacket. The notification window was still floating in front of me. I stared at it, then at the scrolls that were supposed to be my reward. Will they actually come in handy, I wonder? Regardless, I had nothing to lose by taking them with me for now. In this crazy game, you never knew when something was going to be useful. After a moment of thought, I pressed yes and the text shifted. System, you have acquired 2 ancient magic map scrolls. The scrolls can each be used 3 times. System, if you wish to use them, point to the location you wish to go to and shout out the activation phrase. Activation phrase, Yera thu ti ashi poshi. What is with these weird words? I thought, kind of creeped out by the strange text written on the screen. There was nothing to be done for it though, since I wanted to get out of this damned forest as quickly as possible. I think I could activate the scroll, I said, pointing to the map of the northern forest he was holding. You can, yes. You can speak in this ancient mage's tongue, the Crown Prince asked, turning to me with a skeptical look on his face. I felt a little offended by how his tone seemed to imply, don't be absurd. Why are you ooking at me like that? Well, my lady doesn't possess even a drop of mana, isn't that correct? I learned a few ancient activation phrases just in case. Transportation spells are common no matter where you go after all. I lied casually. I didn't actually know if such spells were common, but what did it matter? All that mattered to me was getting out of here. This is common knowledge for anyone who calls themselves a noble. However, I couldn't stand being snubbed, so I chose to imply he was lacking somehow for not knowing something so simple, and an odd look appeared on his face. It seems the education standards for the nobility have changed quite a bit while I was away at war. He allowed reluctantly. Well, give it a go then. Where should we go? The fewer people who know the better when it comes to this sort of thing. I think we should choose somewhere that's not too close to the entrance of the forest, since it's likely to be too crowded there. He unfurled the map, studied it carefully for a moment, and then pointed. We'll go here. As soon as he touched the map, the image zoomed in and soon we could see a fully rendered black and white image of the forest. A rabbit suddenly hopped into view, and I was once again surprised by how realistic the image was. "It's the area designated for hunting small animals," Callisto said, elaborating on the location he'd chosen. It was where this terrible 2-day adventure had begun. I rolled up the map of Volta, tied it closed, and quickly put on the jacket I'd spread out on the floor, not forgetting to retrieve my crossbow as I went. "I'll give it a try, so keep your finger on the map." Callisto nodded, despite the suspicious look on his face. "Count yourself lucky I'm here with you." I groaned inwardly, wishing I could leave him behind. Then I said the silly spell, Yera thu tiashi poshi. As soon as I did so, a white notification window appeared. "System, use the ancient magic map scroll once and move to the desired location." "Yes/no." I pressed yes without hesitation, and immediately there was a blinding flash of light. "You weren't lying, huh?" I heard the Crown Prince's voice and I opened my eyes again. We were no longer in that stupid cave, and instead sitting in the middle of the quiet forest. "System, you used the ancient magic map scroll, Northern Forest to travel, 1/3. I never thought you'd prove to be so useful. You're nothing like what the rumors about you suggest," the Crown Prince said, and as he looked at me real surprise shone in his eyes. "Affection score 35%. The affection score had risen as he stared. I'm not sure whether to take that as a compliment or not. His backhanded flattery didn't make me feel good at all. I stared at his blonde hair, glistening in the early morning sun with stony eyes. "I need to conduct an official investigation, so I'll be taking these," the Crown Prince said, rolling up the map of the Northern Forest. "You do that," I said, handing him the map of Volta as well. I didn't really have any use for the maps anyway. Looking around, I spotted the path I'd been traveling on before I'd gotten lost the day before. "Let's go back now, Your Highness." I was relieved we had managed to return so quickly without getting lost. I stood and began dusting myself off, as did the Crown Prince, the scrolls shoved in his pocket. He suddenly put a hand to his forehead and wobbled. "Ugh, Your Highness," I shouted, grabbing his arm to try and steady him. In the cave it had been too dark, but I could now see that his face was deathly pale. "Are you all right, Your Highness?" How long had his condition been deteriorating? Cold sweat was dripping down his pallid face. I reached out to wipe away some of the moisture, and found his skin so cold that I shivered in sympathy. I recalled how hard it had been to wake him earlier that morning. "Your wounds are infected, aren't they? You told me not to die in front of you. I guess because you don't fancy the idea of having to dispose of my corpse, eh? This is no time for jokes." I practically screamed at him. The pale prince smiled faintly. "Don't worry, I'm not dying. That's not reassuring. Lean on me. We need to go back quickly." "My lady," the Crown Prince called, halting my attempts to drag him away. "Don't go showing your villainous nature now by leaving me to die. Make sure you go and tell somebody to come and get me, you hear?" "What? I don't understand." "If you don't, you'll regret it when I wake." He continued to threaten me, voice increasingly frail, then suddenly slumped like a puppet whose strings were cut. "Your Highness," I yelled, his sudden dead weight causing me to sink to the floor with him. "Your Highness, Your Highness," I shook him hard, but his red eyes remained closed. Scared to death, I pressed my ear to his chest. His heartbeat was slow and quiet, unlike this morning. Though I knew a male protagonist couldn't necessarily die, I was still horrified. "I need to do something." I stood up. "Your Highness, I'll bring someone back to help. Please hang on. Do you understand?" He didn't respond, so I turned and dashed down the path with clenched teeth. "I need to get someone, anyone." Fortunately, the area we'd teleported to wasn't too far from the forest entrance. We'd been very lucky to find the scrolls when we did. I arrived at the fork in the road that I'd seen when I'd first come to this part of the forest, and after that, it took me only a few minutes to arrive at a clearing filled with guards. "Hey, the Crown Prince in the forest," I gasped, trying to catch my breath as I addressed two of the closest knights. They looked surprised to see me, but soon recovered and seized me by the arms. "Lady Penelope has returned." One of the knights shouted into the tent that served as the hunting tournament's headquarters. Their cries brought a slew of knights running, surrounding me quickly. "What the? This almost feels like an arrest." I felt an ominous foreboding feeling creeping over me. "Listen, this is an emergency. The Crown Prince is in the forest and he's..." I shouted at the knights, frowning, as they kept a firm grip on my arms. The knights parted suddenly to make way for someone, and I recognized the captain of the guards, whom I'd first seen a couple of days ago. "Lady Penelope Eckhart, you're under arrest for attempting to murder several members of the nobility." My jaw dropped. "I'm being arrested? Out of nowhere? When would my bad feelings ever prove to be wrong? Chapter 87. Marquis Ellen's aide rushed into his lodge. Lady Penelope has just emerged from the forest alone. She was arrested on sight and escorted to a cell. Alone. What about the Crown Prince? What happened to him? She provided the knights with an account of where they could find the Crown Prince, and he was found unconscious and brought to his palace. How is he doing? He hasn't woken yet, and if you would lend me your ear. Marquis Ellen leaned closer, and the aide whispered, "An informant told me that they haven't determined yet whether his condition was caused by poison, but various minor wounds have been found all over his body." Really, is that so? The old man visibly brightened. He'd been smart to instruct that the weapons be poisoned in preparation for the attack. He'd searched far and wide for the poison they'd eventually used, even resorting to sourcing it from a faraway desert kingdom. Since the symptoms did not appear right away, thanks to the poison's slow spread through the body over a couple of days, it was perfect to prevent facing any scrutiny should the attempt to kill the prince fail. Perhaps we'll be having a funeral soon. Marquis Ellen imagined this joyous outcome, before suddenly turning sharp eyes on the other man. "And you left no trace of our involvement. I heard their tracks ended at the cliff. Yes, we searched the forest along the forest path, and recovered all the weapons we found lying on the ground. As for the holy nation of Layla citizens, they've been hidden away beneath the Empress Consort's palace. Well done, and those who have awakened still don't remember what happened prior to losing consciousness." "No, Marquis. I suppose it's for the better," he said, eyes gleaming. He'd put an incredible amount of work into planning this rebellion. The first thing the Crown Prince had done after returning from war was to scrub clean any connections between the criminal underworld and the second prince's supporters. It made it impossible to hire assassins as they had done before, leaving the Marquis with no choice but to call upon any man of some ambition from the 6 houses that made up the bulk of the second prince's supporters. The hunting tournament was set as the date of the Crown Prince's death, and the selected men were disguised as nobles of the capital after receiving training that would aid them in the assassination attempt. One of these men was a distant relative of the House of Ellen, Baron Chalit. However, 5 or 6 men weren't enough to pull off killing the Crown Prince. This was where the holy nation of Layla had come in, their plans conveniently lining up with the Marquis. Even the Empress Consort had been prevailed upon to help by facilitating the transportation of their forces through the palace. In the end, he had successfully sent as many as 20 assassins after the prince. What? They're all unconscious. Marquis Ellen had nearly fainted when he'd heard from the attendants he'd sent to tidy up after the assassins that the would-be killers had been found unconscious. Thankfully, it hadn't been that difficult to figure out who the sole witness accompanying the Crown Prince was. "She threatened me, saying the crossbow would turn me into a simpleton. It has to be that woman who did this to the Baron." First, there was Lady Gloria's account, who'd screamed at the top of her lungs upon seeing her fiancé in such a state. In addition, Lady Penelope was nowhere to be found. If the Crown Prince had been responsible, he would have simply massacred the attackers with his blade. The second prince's supporters had despaired, realizing that not only had the assassination attempt failed, but that there was also a living witness. However, there was a solution to every predicament. Now then, all we have to do is blame everything on the girl. Marquis Ellen planned to pin the entire thing on Lady Penelope, the only witness. Her good reputation was practically non-existent. People already called her the rabid dog of House Eckhart. It would be easy enough to fool the masses into believing his version of events. His initial plan had been to confuse the issue by having the girl arrested on sight for attempted murder of members of the aristocracy. But now the Crown Prince had also turned up unconscious. Apparently, the deity of Layla was smiling down on him this day. "Looks like I'll be able to deal some damage to those damned Eckharts too." Marquis Ellen sniggered to himself, satisfied. Regardless though, his first priority was making sure he was free of any suspicion regarding the incident, since he had bigger plans yet to come in the future. In that sense, Penelope, the very reason for this attempt's miserable failure, was the perfect prey. While everyone was occupied with the crazy girl from the House of Eckhart, he would send out the assassins provided by the Holy Nation and have them destroy any evidence. The most ideal outcome would see the Crown Prince dying because of the poison, but it didn't matter even if he survived for now. Any accusations he made meant nothing without proof to back them up, just as with the countless attempts on his life that had come before. In fact, I'll have her charged with the attempted murder of a member of the imperial family as well. By the time the prince awoke, those involved in the assassination attempt, witness or otherwise, will have been effectively silenced. It was the perfect plan, and the Marquis burst into delighted laughter just thinking about it. What about Chalit, by the way? Is he still acting like a simpleton? Yes, he hasn't recovered yet, the aide said. What a waste of resources. Marquis Ellen tutted, annoyed. I spent a lot of money procuring dragon blood for him to improve his prospects, but he's even more of an idiot now than he was before. Baron Chalit had never been the quickest, even as a child. It was unacceptable that the Empress Consort's family had no male heir to represent the family at large social events. After considerable searching, the Marquis had found a distant relative who at least possessed a healthy body, if a rather slow wit. He'd given the man an intelligence potion brewed with expensive dragon's blood, which was full of concentrated mana, and arranged for his engagement with the House of Kellen in order to make him a respectable member of the capital city's nobility. And I thought he'd finally start using his brain. Tusk. Marquis Ellen's lips twitched in annoyance. He stood from his seat. Let's go see Baron Chalit. Baron Chalit's lodge was still in chaos. He's exhibiting side effects that indicate he's come in close contact with mana, said the court physician, shaking his head after examining the Baron. Side effects? What is that supposed to mean? His body was exposed to an excessive amount of mana in a very short period, which has reduced his brain functions abnormally. It will likely take a considerable amount of time for him to recover fully. The physician, upon expressing his regret that nothing could be done, quickly left the lodge. I saw the hunting goddess in the forest. He mumbled the Baron, drool trickling down his chin. Please pull yourself together already, screamed his fiancée. Count Kellen, standing nearby exuding a nervous air, tried to console his daughter. Gloria, my child, calm down. What in the world is happening, father? I'm humiliated. I can't bear to be seen in public ever again. Gloria, why did you allow that crazy bitch to take part in the hunting tournament at all this year? Gloria shouted, tugging at her blue hair in rage. Count Kellen couldn't bring himself to confess that he'd been given the diamond mines on the condition that he never mention the affair ever again. Goddess. Oh, goddess, muttered Marquis Ellen's nephew, saliva continuing to dribble out of his mouth. At that moment, a man stepped into the lodge. Count Kellen, welcome, Marquis. Remain seated, he said, waving off any attempts to rise and greet him from the two of them. You're here as well, Gloria. That's good, we heard a ruckus outside. What's happened? Lady Penelope has returned, said the Marquis, and Gloria immediately shot to her feet. Where is she right now? She was arrested straight away and locked up. The guards are on our side, said the Marquis, soothing the girl, her immediate reaction making her fury obvious. The most important thing now is your testimony, Gloria. Can you deliver it convincingly? Of course, I wasn't even the only person in attendance at the tea party, Gloria said with a firm nod, shaking with rage. It seemed obvious something had happened between her and Lady Penelope, since she was so furious it was as if steam were pouring from her ears. I'll leave it in your capable hands then. The House of Eckhart will retaliate. Are you sure we can handle it? And what if the Crown Prince wakes too early? Count Kellen asked, looking worried. The Eckharts were not easy prey. Don't you worry. There's no evidence against us, and the only witness to the entire thing, the Crown Prince, is dying. Marquis Ellen's smile was deeply satisfied as he patted Count Kellen on the shoulder reassuringly. The Emperor isn't in the capital right now either. If necessary, we can blame the assassination attempt on the House of Eckhart and do away with those bastards altogether. This crisis was turning out to be a good opportunity. The Marquis had already fabricated a story that explained the failed assassination attempt. At first, he'd intended to claim that the Crown Prince, after killing the bear, had gone on a rampage and attacked Baron Chalit and the other nobles. There were a number of nobles who could corroborate the story, and only one Crown Prince after all. Since the incident was to take place deep in the forest without any witnesses, it wouldn't have been hard to argue that this was truly what had happened. But then Lady Penelope had appeared, and the Crown Prince was unconscious, thus creating an advantageous situation for the Marquis. Even if the Crown Prince wakes up, he won't be able to do anything, just as before. Everything will already be over by the time he comes to. Marquis Ellen's eyes gleamed insidiously as he gazed into the distance, plotting. Chapter 88. My crossbow was confiscated, and I was dragged away to be locked in a tower located in the northern part of the palace. Thankfully, it wasn't an underground dungeon, the kind that violent criminals were usually kept in. It seemed to be a space reserved for nobles awaiting trial, so the room was quite clean and dignified. I'd have been hard put to describe it as a prison, if not for the iron bars that covered the exits. What in the world is going on? I glanced around the room, sitting on the bed with a deep sigh. Derek will make a huge fuss over this. Frankly, I was more worried about Derek's reaction than any accusations against me that I'd tried to murder some nobles. If you damage the family reputation once more, I won't let it end with only imprisonment. He had threatened me with harsh punishment if I brought shame to the family again, and yet here I was, laughing to myself and resigned to my fate. I had no idea where this crazy game's plot was headed next. There was one thing I was sure of, however. This whole situation was surely just another plot point laid out by the game. Retrieving the short sword I'd tucked inside my jacket pocket, I could tell that the House of Eckhart's influence was at work once again. Though my crossbow had been confiscated, they hadn't dared to search me. This was probably why I was able to remain so calm, even in the present situation. An assassin's token. I hadn't had time to examine the reward properly when we'd been in the cave. The poisoned short sword that had been used to stab the crown prince was decorated with a mysterious pattern. I had no idea what it represented, but I recognized it as the crest of a house unknown to me. Watch it. What the hell are you doing? Why are you cutting your hair with a knife? It's dangerous. I recalled how the crown prince had grabbed my arm when I tried to cut my hair so that I could use it as a makeshift brush. I'd thought he was overreacting at the time, but perhaps he already knew at that point that the blade was poisoned. I turned the weapon around in my hand, studying it with a somber expression. In addition to the pattern, there was a small braided ornament attached to the hilt, made of blue silk thread. The sword's appearance was like a gift from someone wishing me well. Now then, if I find out which house this family crest belongs to, will I be able to come out of this mess a hero? I muttered to myself before putting the weapon away for now. It wouldn't do me any good if someone found out that I had evidence of the assassination attempt. At that moment, someone called to me through the bars. Penelope Eckhart. In the dim light of the torches, I could see a pair of stony blue eyes. Lord Derek. It was indeed my eldest brother. Startled, I stood and slowly approached the door. Perhaps it was because of the unfamiliar environment that I found myself in. But even though I knew he was going to be angry with me, I was glad to see his face again following the 2 miserable days I'd spent lost in the forest. I checked the score above his head. Affection score 29%. The score hadn't dropped since I'd last seen him, which was a massive relief. I heard you shot a bear, Derek said, presumably preparing to begin his diatribe. Oh yes, I was, I said, suddenly forced to think of an excuse. You're not hurt. I couldn't believe my ears. My head shot up and I stared at him in shock. He wore no expression on his face, making it hard to guess what he was thinking. Regardless, I felt like I might cry, since the first thing he'd said to me was actually something caring, rather than reproachful. Perhaps I hadn't realized just how hurt I'd felt about being accused of trying to murder all those nobles. Are you and father all right as well? And Reynold left the palace to quickly retrieve the mage responsible for imbuing your pellets with magic. The first thing we need to do is prove that they were not meant for killing anyone. I'm sorry. Things got out of hand, I muttered weakly. My brain, on the other hand, was in overdrive. In the game, the members of the Eckhart family had only protected the fake, until the real daughter appeared. Their patience had run out in the end, of course, leading to Penelope's death. Maybe giving him the weapon right now is the solution. I decided to do just that. Lord Derek, I've been falsely accused. I have a way to prove it. In my pocket, I began, intending on telling him everything that had happened over the past 2 days. Penelope Eckhart, Derek interrupted, cutting me off. There are 6 separate people claiming that you shot them using your crossbow. I don't understand. At the tea party on the day of the incident, you even scared the women with your crossbow, threatening to turn them into idiots. My eyes widened. Had the rumors spread so much already? Well, your pellets are designed to create an electric shock that causes a person to fall unconscious and activate a spell that erases their memory. However, Baron Chalit, Lady Gloria's fiancé and the nephew of Marquis Ellen, went completely insane after you shot him. I hear he won't stop drooling and demanding to see the hunting goddess with dark pink hair he met in the forest. What? My jaw dropped upon hearing this absurd accusation. What's going on? Does this mean that the blue-haired girl's fiancé was one of the assassins? I frowned, trying to think. I had no idea which political faction Count Kellen belonged to or who Baron Chalit was, but I could make an educated guess based on the fact that he was Marquis Ellen's nephew, who was related to the Empress consort on her maternal side. So tell me why you lied to the other women at the tea party, or rather, Derek paused. He seemed to have arrived at his own conclusion already. Tell me what angered you so much this time that you felt you had to shoot at those noblemen. I need to prove that there were extenuating circumstances at the very least. My mind went completely blank and I had no words. I'd expected Derek to ask for my side of the story, since I'd assumed that this series of events would end with the accusations against me being proven wrong and my past notoriety erased. But Derek's words suggested something different. It's almost as if he assumes that I really did shoot at those nobles in a blind rage. It was true that I'd shot them using the crossbow, of course, but I'd been shooting at masked killers, not noblemen whose faces I could make out. I gaped, unable to find words, before finally replying, voice hollow, "It doesn't occur to you that perhaps I was just defending myself?" Viscount Garboil, who was carried back unconscious by an attendant, testified. Derek replied immediately, voice cold. "According to him, you appeared in front of them as they hunted the bear together. You claimed you were taking the bear for yourself and shot at them with your crossbow. What did you just say? The bear was already attacking them, so he had no way to avoid your attacks as well." "Huh, and you believe that?" I asked, laughing incredulously. The story was absurd, even by the real Penelope's standards. How could a single noble lady defeat all those men by herself? Though I did do just that. If not for the game systems, however, the Crown Prince and I would be dead and buried. What I believe isn't important. Derek didn't seem to see things the way I did, however. The bigger issue is that there is a strange rumor going around, accusing you of silencing any witnesses so that you could assassinate the Crown Prince. Assassinate? These accusations were getting more and more outlandish. Not bothering to hide my indignation, I said, "And what do I have to gain by killing the Crown Prince? They probably mean to use you as a weapon against our house." "Lord Derek, first of all, I wasn't the assassin they were. I knew I needed to start with the truth after realizing we were straying from the main subject. I was the one hunting the bear. The Crown Prince, who happened to be passing by at the time, saw me struggling and helped me to kill the bear and behead it. How could I have possibly shot down all those men on my own? I'm surprised that anyone believes such a ridiculous story in the first place. An investigation is bound to bring the truth to light. What matters is," Derek said in a low tone, interrupting me again, "whether you actually did shoot the bear and those nobles." I dragged my gaze from his lips to his eyes. "Lord Derek," I breathed. "In addition, the Crown Prince, the only person capable of corroborating your testimony, is currently at death's door." His unfeeling blue eyes made me feel cold all over. "Oh, I understood. He'd never believed me from the get-go. If all this was just a silly prank played by a reckless simpleton, we can handle it as such," he said. In other words, he was telling me he wasn't going to help me if the accusations turned out to be true. A hollow laugh escaped my lips. Here I was, ignorant of what he was really thinking, and actually grateful that he'd come to visit me. I'd even considered giving him the only article of evidence I possessed. "Lord Derek, you never believed I was innocent. Rather, you never intended to check whether the rumors were actually true or not. It's best to get things sorted out quickly before the rumors get out of hand," he said, adopting a placating tone. He was merely pacifying his angry little sister, in a way he seemed very used to. "That way you can get released quickly. If we let this drag on—" "No," I said, glaring at him frostily. "You're saying this because it's much easier for you to just accuse me of attacking those nobles. Penelope, you're thinking that I'm just a crazy bitch who has always created nothing but trouble. Wait a second, You know that if you paint me as scum, regardless of whether the rumors are actually true, and use money to silence everyone's wagging tongues, the public won't think about it twice." "Watch your mouth," Derek said, his jaw tense in the face of my brutal accusations. "You're the one who caused all this trouble. Don't you dare throw around accusations so carelessly." "No, you're the one who's being careless." Chapter 89. I spat the words through gritted teeth, almost not even meaning to say them out loud. Derek's blue eyes, visible only through the bars, widened slowly and his score dropped. Affection score -3%, affection score 26%. I watched it go down without any expression. Despite the change in affection, he still didn't understand what I was saying to him. "What did you say?" he asked, looking a little dazed. "Go away," I said. I'd managed to silence him, but I felt no satisfaction. "I have nothing more to say to you. Penelope Eckhart," he said, his voice dropping lower. Affection score -2%, affection score 24%. It had taken only moments for his affection score to crumble from nearly 30%. I didn't have any regrets, however. I'd crossed out his name a long time ago. I could confidently say that I'd had zero expectations for him, but I was still having trouble keeping my expression free of emotion. "I'll take care of this matter myself," I don't need your help, Lord Derek. Just leave me to deal with it alone, as you've always done. Whether I die or go to prison, it's none of your concern. What the hell are you saying, Penelope? Derek was growing increasingly upset thanks to the arrogant tone I'd adopted, but I spun away from him, unwilling to hear any more. I knew my behavior had potentially dangerous consequences, but I had no intention of taking anything I'd said back now. As long as I didn't die, I didn't care if his damned score dropped. I irritably turned my back on the door and sat on the bed. I heard his soft footsteps fading away. I laughed, flabbergasted. I was the one who told him to go, but he hadn't hesitated to leave his little sister alone in a cell. Fine, that's how you've always been anyway. When I'd carefully stored away the second present given to me by Derek in one of my jewelry boxes, I'd actually dared to think that our relationship might be improving. Though I hadn't really tried to wipe the slate clean, so to speak, I at least hadn't done anything more to warrant being called a reckless simpleton. I'd hoped that perhaps we could form a good relationship as siblings, even if we couldn't develop a romance like the one the game called for. Maybe having family kinship would have made working toward an ending less painful. I'd been a complete fool to hope for that, of course. I don't need your pity. I can handle this on my own. I glared through the bars stonily. At that moment, it was almost as if I could hear one of the red strings of fate that I was clutching snap. After spending a night in my cell, I was given a simple meal early in the morning and led by knights to a meeting room of sorts. They were treating me pretty generously, since I was supposedly a vicious criminal who'd shot 7 noblemen without rhyme or reason. I guess I'm getting the VIP treatment. The ropes tying my wrists were knotted pretty loosely, too. They still hadn't searched me either, even though I'd been brought to a meeting hall located inside the palace. They must think I'm a completely harmless child without my crossbow. The way their behavior seemed to contradict itself was funny to me. Announcing Lady Penelope Eckhart, cried an attendant as the gigantic door to the meeting hall slowly opened. My footsteps were audible as the murmuring voices inside quickly fell silent. The high-ranking nobles in charge of managing state affairs were all seated in the hall. As I walked past them with my head held high, I discovered something that made my eyes glitter triumphantly. I could see little plaques in front of each seat that were engraved with the symbols of each family. That's good. The plagues grew fancier, depending on the importance of the person they sat before. I studied them intently out of the corner of my eye, and finally found the one I was looking for when I'd almost reached the last of them. There it is. The crest was the same one that decorated the sword. I felt the tension bleed out of me in an instant as I saw who was seated behind the crest, since I was now certain that things were going just as intended according to the game's designs. I sighed in relief and turned away to regard those in the opposite high-set seats, the Duke and his eldest son. The Duke's face contorted when our eyes met, likely offended by the sight of his adoptive daughter being brought in with her hands bound. Derek, on the other hand, was expressionless. Affection score 22%. His affection score had fallen another 2% since I'd seen him last, which made for a total of 7% in lost points. Losing that much wouldn't spell the end of the game just yet, so I wasn't overly concerned, though that was likely only because I'd been trapped in this game world for quite some time now. Had this happened when I'd just arrived, I'd have been scared stiff by such a huge drop. I don't care. At the sight of his dark hair, I turned coldly away. What mattered to me more than his affection score was getting through this episode safely. Please be silent, everyone. A solemn voice rang through the room. It seemed the trial was about to start. There was a lectern placed 1 level below the Emperor's seat, and in front of it stood an old man with white hair and a beard. As His Majesty is currently not present in the palace, and the Crown Prince is currently unwell, I will be presiding over this trial as the Minister of Justice. Anyone who has any objections, please raise your hand. This was a similar process to how they dealt with things while the Crown Prince was gone fighting the war, so no one spoke up. The game had described the old man as fair and of good moral standing. He was well suited to the task, and I had nothing to lose by allowing him to lead. Lady Penelope Eckhart. Yes, you stand here today accused of attempting to murder 7 noblemen during the hunting tournament. I must ask that you swear honorably as a subject of the great Aoka Empire to speak truthfully for the duration of this trial. I do solemnly swear to that effect, I replied simply. The minister turned and addressed someone else. We'll start with the victims' accounts. Viscount Garboyle. A man seated at the far end rose and came to stand next to me. He bowed briefly to the minister and began giving his testimony without hesitation. The 7 of us ventured deep into the gold hunting area yesterday so that we could hunt a bear. We were lucky enough to find one. After an extended struggle, We were about to deliver the killing blow when Lady Penelope suddenly appeared out of nowhere, threatening us with her crossbow and demanding that we hand over the bear. Oh no, what has the world come to? Tusk, I could hear people making sounds of disapproval all around. I glanced at the Duke's face, which was now looking more pinched than before. We tried to reason with her that since we'd come upon the bear first, we would help her find another bear to kill herself. She refused to listen. Baron Chilit approached her to try to talk some sense into her, and the lady shot him without warning. My goodness! A violent, loud slamming noise rang through the room. Marquis Ellen, seated opposite the Duke, had slammed both hands down on the desk angrily. How could a girl behave so wickedly? The nobles seated around him all nodded and cried out in agreement. Encouraged, Viscount Garboil continued delivering his performance with greater pizzazz. While we stood frozen in shock and confusion, the lady took aim and shot at each of us. We all were knocked unconscious. When we came to, we were back at the campground, and my only friend, Baron Chilit, was. Viscount Garboil pretended to stifle a sob, covering his face and turning away. The pieces were slowly starting to come together in my mind, and I began to understand how it had come to be that I was being accused of attempting to murder the Crown Prince. I watched the proceedings as if I were watching a play. The most effective strategy for me would be to turn the tables at precisely the right moment. At that moment someone stood to speak on my behalf. I object, Your Honor. Affection score 22%. Derek continued in a calm voice. Penelope's crossbow is not intended for killing anyone. I was surprised since he'd walked away from me without an ounce of hesitation yesterday. I stared at him blankly. The pellets were designed for use when hunting small animals, and the only magic they were imbued with was a spell that causes its target to fall unconscious and erases the target's short-term memories. It puzzles me that these men, supposedly shot by Penelope with pellets enchanted in such a way, so clearly remember the events leading up to the attack. But that's, don't you lie, Viscount Garboil shouted, his face going red. It seemed Derek had found a critical weakness in their story. In the face of the Viscount's rage, he didn't so much as blink. I'm not lying. I have the very mage who enchanted the pellets waiting outside in the hall right now. Let's call him in and hear what he has to say. Lord Derek, we understand you only want to defend a member of your family, but this is going too far. How are we to know that you haven't bribed this mage? The Viscount asked. Derek responded immediately, obviously expecting to hear this sort of objection. I have the contract that we signed when issuing the commission. Viscount Garboil cut him off with a shout, however, and there are witnesses who heard Lady Penelope herself explain that her weapon makes simpletons of its targets. Your Honor, please allow us to hear these witnesses' testimonies. The audience murmured. A member of the aristocracy was clearly regarded as more honorable, and therefore their word was to be trusted more than a mage's, who could apparently be bribed. They may speak, the minister allowed with a nod. The door to the hall opened as if on cue, and 3 people entered. Chapter 90. A wheelchair was pushed inside, rattling loudly and filling the quiet chamber with noise. A thin man was sitting reclined in the chair, and a familiar blue-haired lady wearing a haughty expression was pushing it. Countess Dorothea was walking beside her primly. The blue-haired girl was glaring at me, her eyes burning with rage even as her lips were stretched wide in a mocking grin. I could feel the animosity coming off her in waves from across the room. At this point, I'm not even sure who the villain is anymore. I was starting to feel more and more bitter about this whole damned circus. I thought Penelope was supposed to be the worst villain in the game, but it had to be that it was actually this evil bunch who were trying to have me locked away in prison, even though I'd done nothing to deserve it. The Goddess, my indignation shattered at the sight of the man suddenly squirming in the wheelchair. Oh Goddess, Goddess, drool running down his chin, he flailed and reached for me. Stay still, Lady Gloria blanched, grabbing onto her fiancé. Oh my God, looking disgusted, Countess Dorothea backed away. An attendant was forced to come forward and tie Baron Chilit's hands with a length of cloth and gag him to silence him. Ahem. Lady Gloria, you may speak, said the minister, silencing the murmurs in the room. Lady Penelope pointed her crossbow at us at the tea party and told us that it was enchanted. She said it would turn anyone she shot into a simpleton. The whole time she was speaking, the blue-haired lady glared daggers at me. Present at the time was the hostess, Countess Dorothea, as well as wives and daughters belonging to many of the noble houses. Isn't that right, my lady? Yes, I heard her say that too, Countess Dorothea said timidly, glancing fearfully at me. She flinched when our eyes met and fell silent. I smirked at her. Looks like my threats were effective. This was a good sign for me. When the woman with the blue hair had finished delivering her angry testimony, the minister turned to me. "Lady Penelope, do you have any objections to the facts presented in their testimony?" "I don't," I said briefly. As expected, jeers could be heard immediately from Marquis Ellen's side. "In after what happened last year too. What has the world come to? The Duke seems to be educating his children so poorly." Suddenly the trial appeared to be going very badly for me. "Your Honour," Derek cried urgently, surging to his feet. "My sister has been sick and bedbound, and she has only just recovered." I frowned at hearing this. I was in perfect health, and I didn't like the lie he had chosen to use as an excuse. "And it's only been a day since she went missing and was found again. Of course she can't be expected to be in her right mind." "I'm perfectly fine, and am in full possession of all my faculties." Unable to listen to him any longer, I cut Derek off. "If every one of the witnesses has finished speaking, I'd like to have my turn now." "Penelope," Derek growled warningly, but I ignored him and turned to the minister. He nodded, giving his consent. "You may give your statement. First of all, with the exception of Lady Gloria's testimony, nothing that has been said today is remotely true." "But that's—" the Viscount tried to protest immediately. "Calm yourself, Viscount Garboil," warned the minister, causing him to quickly shut up. I was allowed to continue without interruption, and what Lady Gloria spoke of was just a silly joke, the kind you'd expect to hear at any tea party. I said, shrugging casually as I glanced around, deliberately projecting a cheeky air. "I can't say I appreciate being falsely accused in this way." "Falsely accused?" Lady Gloria screeched, glaring at me. "You are completely out of line, Lady Penelope. How is it just a silly joke to aim your crossbow at someone? But you were the one who requested I show off my skills, were you not? And I'm sure Countess Dorothea can attest as to whether or not it was just a joke." I said calmly, turning to the Countess, who was standing nervously to the side. Beaming at her and making eye contact, as if daring her to lie, I said, "In the end, she was the one who laughed the loudest. Isn't that right, my lady? Am I making anything up thus far?" "No, you're right, you did tell us you were joking." "Countess Dorothea," the blue-haired woman screamed. The Countess stammered with a stunned expression for a moment, before eventually falling silent once more. I'd only attended the tea party for a short time, but I'd been there long enough to get a feel for the woman hosting it. She enjoyed making fun of other people, but she was also the despicable sort who never did so openly. That had been easy enough to discern from the way she'd quietly encouraged things, but only added little comments of her own. No doubt Gloria had convinced her that this was the perfect opportunity to crush me forever, and she'd come to get revenge for the humiliation she'd suffered at the tea party and lend a hand. However, people like her couldn't stand to have any blame pointed at themselves. What's more, she's afraid of me. The unspoken threat I'd made at the tea party had worked wonders. I was unable to hide my smile as I watched her standing there stiffly, unable to meet my eyes. "But, Your Honour, you must remember that she nearly shot me last year as well. Your Honour, the bear Viscount Garboil claims he was hunting was my prey from the start." I interrupted quickly before Gloria could attempt to muddy the water any further. I was completely contradicting the Viscount's claims, and in response, the minister's eyes immediately gleamed with interest. Continue." "I shot it with my crossbow but wasn't able to subdue it completely, and the Crown Prince was the one who beheaded the creature for me." "That's not true. She lies. Everything she says," Viscount Garboil shouted, shaking his head quickly. "I'm sure we can discover who's telling the truth by checking the carcass," I said rigidly. "If, as Viscount Garboil claims, many men attacked the bear at once, there should be evidence of that on the body, correct?" In response to my suggestion, the minister called a knight who was standing nearby. "We'll confirm one way or the other right away. Sir Dennis, go with the coroner and check the bear's corpse." "Yes, sir." Things were going smoothly. Viscount Garboil, who'd been giving the performance of his life, failed to hide his anxiety. "But that's because we cut the bear's throat almost immediately." This new claim was both absurd and self-contradictory. He also seemed to lack confidence in what he was saying, his voice trailing off into a whisper. At that moment, an elderly voice spoke from the left. "But why is it then, Lady Penelope, that you were in the forest with the Crown Prince?" So the puppet master finally speaks. Marquis Ellen, seemingly unsatisfied with the direction his pawn's testimony was taking, gazed down at me with some concern. "As far as I am aware, you and the Crown Prince have never been properly introduced. I find it hard to believe that you suddenly decided to go hunting together." I could see members of the audience nodding their heads in response to the question posed by the Marquis. However, I'd expected this to come up from the moment I'd heard that I was being accused of attempting to assassinate the Crown Prince. Even if I had the assassin's token, With me, I had to provide a plausible explanation for how we'd ended up killing a bear together, since in reality it had been the game developers who'd brought us together. I couldn't hope to clear up any doubt if I simply called it a coincidence. That would only give those making accusations a chance to find fault in my story. In order to stamp out any and all doubt once and for all, I chose to employ a painful but necessary tactic. I had arranged to meet with the Crown Prince in secret. I don't want to be saying this, the system is forcing my hand, I told myself, clenching my teeth and forcing myself to smile. His Highness and I actually have feelings. We've been meeting because no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't keep the tremor from my voice. I can't do it. I was in huge trouble. If I choked and didn't finish explaining, it would surely cause suspicion. I had to do something to overcome the predicament I'd found myself in, one way or another. We have feelings for one another, I finally managed to say after clearing my throat. What? There was a deafening bang on the table to my right. The Duke was staring down at me with eyes the size of saucers. Penelope Eckhart, what are you?